Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. There has been a very interesting turn of events taking place within the confines of the conflict. It does appear that the Ukrainian military has launched a very limited operation in the Belgorod region of the Russian Federation proper. Now, is this a serious operation designed to seize control of Russian territory? No, probably not. What is the purpose of this operation by these two alleged units, the Free Russia Regiment and the Russian Volunteer Corps of the Russian Democratic Republic? Well, the big issue for the Ukrainian narrative was the loss of Bakhmut. The Ukrainians have expended an incredible amount of manpower, units, armaments to defend Bakhmut. The Ukrainians were attempting to maintain control of Bakhmut, and it got away from them. Bakhmut was eventually enveloped, and those Ukrainian forces that were actively defending Bakhmut, to include a host of brigade combat formations, including the 93rd Mechanized Brigade, elements of the 8th Special Purpose Regiment, Special Operations Forces, 10th Special Forces Detachment, the 5th Assault Brigade of the Ukrainian National Guard, the 80th Air Assault Brigade of the Ukrainian Airborne Forces, and a host of other units that were actively participating in the defense of Bakhmut. And the Ukrainians had created multiple lines of defense designed to try and prevent Russian forces from taking control of that city. And the hope was for the Ukrainian command was to stop the Russians from taking Bakhmut. Now, that was coming from Kiev. Obviously, there were Western nation states, NATO, even the United States had advised, look, maybe you should pull back. This is probably not the best opportunity for a defensive operation that was going to end successfully. But the Ukrainian leadership chose to continue fighting in Bakhmut. And again, quite frankly, the Ukrainian military, again, was defeated in Bakhmut. When you lose territory, just as if this was a Russian-controlled city, and Russian forces would have been militarily defeated, and Ukrainian forces would have moved in, the West, the Ukraine, would have been calling it a Ukrainian victory. They took a city. They seized control of a heavily defended city. Well, the Russians did the same thing. After a very persistent series of operations, brutal, heavy, urbanized combat, the Russians took control of Bakhmut. And it was probably more of a military defeat in terms of the significant loss of Ukrainian personnel than the Ukrainians are leading on to. So what has happened? In order to kind of change that political narrative of what happened in Bakhmut, the Ukrainians are sidestepping and they're creating the opportunity to talk about something else. And that something else is this operation that's now taking place in Belgorod. Let's go over to the deep state map where you can kind of see exactly what's happening a little better. And we'll go to the north, all the way to the Belgorod region. So again, the Ukrainians are alleging that they've taken control of this border checkpoint, fairly large grouping of buildings and facilities designed to process the inflow and outflow of commerce and people going back and forth between Russia and Ukraine. So again, it sounds like one, possibly two regimental-sized formations have launched an attack into the Russian Federation. Now, it doesn't look like they're there to stay. It looks like it was more of a nuisance raid, but at the same time, a fairly sizable raid with possibly 1,000 to 2,000 troops involved in this operation. Now, was this a Russian partisan outfit that launched this attack into Russia? No, it wasn't. It was absolutely, beyond a shadow of a doubt, a Ukrainian military unit. In Ukraine, you do not have the opportunity to form a regimental size unit of dissident fighters. They have to be fully sponsored by the government of Ukraine. The operation into the Belgorod region was supported and directed by Ukrainian forces. So again, at this point, I think it's designed to draw attention to what's happening here rather than talk about what occurred in Bakhmut. And then compounding that, you have this other issue that's going on. This is the paused great counteroffensive that was never able to start. The Russians have been lighting up the Ukrainians with precision-guided cruise missile attacks, drone attacks, air attacks, with a wide variety of targets being hit throughout Ukraine. Even in the last 24 hours, there have been cruise missile attacks against targets, military targets, not critical infrastructure targets, but actual military targets designed to facilitate offensive operations against the Russians. And the Russians have been going after those targets. Now, is it possible we could see pressure continue to build and we'll eventually see some sort of Ukrainian counteroffensive? It is possible. But again, there's a great concern both in the Ukrainian military and Western sources that are, again, very concerned that if the Ukrainians launch this operation, especially, and this is very important, without supporting air power. Remember, the HIMARS essentially is the Ukrainian air power. And unfortunately for the Ukrainians, the Russians have become fairly proficient at jamming those GPS signals and making the HIMARS much less accurate depending on where the HIMARS is being used. There is areas where the HIMARS is still very effective, but then there's also areas where the HIMARS has been reduced in effectiveness by Russian electronic warfare assets. That's where we're kind of at right now. Now again, there still continues to be the prospect for a Russian counteroffensive north of Bakhmut within the vicinity of Seversk. That has been not taken off the table as of yet. But again, there's a great deal of concern in Ukrainian circles on if they were to launch this counteroffensive, if in fact it would be successful, or it would be a devastating loss in equipment and manpower. So again, we're going to continue to watch what's happening in the Belgorod region. I think at the same time, this operation is very risky in terms of the possible escalation of the conflict. Now look, at the same time, Russia, you come to the party, expect to dance. And this is what the dance looks like when Ukrainian forces enter Russia proper. Now, it's hard to say, are they going to stay there, or are they going to immediately turn around and and boot scoot out of there. Difficult to say at this point. Probably these forces will not be here in the next 48 hours. They withdraw past the border, and I would anticipate we would see some sort of possible Russian counteroperation within this area as well. So that's kind of where we're set for today. We will continue to monitor and report. Thank you for joining us today. More to come very, very soon. And as always, have a good day.